Welcome to Biz Wire. I'm Joseph Nordstrom in Beijing. Climate talks in Bonn, Germany ended without a breakthrough in bridging a deep divide between China and the United States, though some positive developments occurred during the week of talks between 160 nations. For example, new, more flexible ways to fight climate change were hashed out and aired formulas to resolve disputes between rich and poor on sharing the burden of curbing greenhouse gas emissions as part of a new UN deal, a successor to the 1997 Kyoto Protocol. Attempts to reach agreement have foundered above all on a failure to agree on the contribution developing countries should make to curbing the emissions responsible for global warming. There were no breakthroughs in Bonn, with tougher decisions put off at least until the next session in June. Developing nations said rich countries appeared unwilling to keep promises to take the lead in cutting emissions and called for more focus on burden sharing to safeguard the interests of the poor. China and the United States showed little indication of closer cooperation despite agreeing last month to step up efforts on climate change, saying they hoped they would inspire action by others. China stuck to its insistence that developed nations should collectively cut greenhouse gas emissions by between 25% and 40% below 1990 levels by 2020. Barack Obama's plan is the equivalent of a 4% cut. The United States won some support for a suggestion that the 2015 deal should be based on national promises of action, while China wants far more binding commitments by the rich. Chinese chief negotiator Su Wei also said China could not impose caps on its rising emissions because it needed time to focus on economic growth, despite U.S. calls for tougher action by Beijing. Su Wei said that in China, the per capita income is just around $5,000 per year, compared to $40,000 or more in industrialized countries. As a result of nearly 35 years of record-breaking economic growth, China's environment has suffered. Its coal-powered factories and power stations pump out thick clouds of soot, making it the world's #1 emitter of greenhouse gases. With its poisonous air, water, and soil, it is hard for many to see China as anything other than an environmental villain, but a new report portrays it in a different light as a leader on tackling climate change. The report by the Australian Climate Commission states that while China and the United States together produce approximately 37% of world emissions, that both nations are on track to meet their international commitments to tackle climate change. The report also said that 2012 was a year of extraordinary growth as China emerged as the world's renewable energy powerhouse, taking ambitious strides to add renewable energy to its mix. The UN talks have remained deadlocked, and no comprehensive global agreement on reducing greenhouse gas emissions is expected by 2015. While China is increasing the amount of renewable energy it produces, it is also increasing its emissions. China's breakneck economic growth has caused what is likely to be irreparable damage to its environment. But on the positive side, there is little doubt that the Chinese government is aware of the need to improve the situation. Public anger is increasing as Chinese citizens are no longer willing to sacrifice clean air and drinking water for economic wealth. China has acknowledged its position as the world's largest CO2 emitter, but remains firm on its position that the country's per capita emissions, along with its historical emissions, are far below those of developed nations. But it has set a target to reduce its carbon intensity by 17% by 2015. China's actions on the environment and climate change may become more urgent as the very goal that caused environmental damage, its drive for GDP growth, is affected. According to some recent estimates, in 2010, environmental degradation cost about 3.5% of China's GDP. China's new leadership has acknowledged that environmental damage is one of the biggest challenges it faces, and while China's emissions are unlikely to be reduced in the next few years, it is making a shift towards a more sustainable energy base. According to Pew Charitable Trust's annual report on global investment in clean energy, China advanced its position as the epicenter of clean energy finance in 2012, attracting $65.1 billion in investment, 20% more than in 2011. There are important choices for the government to make, and these choices will have a huge impact, not just domestically, but globally. Well, this is Biz Wire on the Blue Ocean Network. Stay tuned for more in Economic Insight.